Yeah. celebrate every year, but don't truly understand. We see it everywhere.
In the heart of Imperial...
Valentine's Day. We all know it as a time to celebrate romance and love.
My name is Siobhan, and I'm writing to you all the way from Delhi in India. I've been watching your videos and listening to your podcast for a long time now, partly as a way of improving my colloquial English, but I've only recently felt able to contribute. You see, I have my own scary story to share, one that details an event which I saw with my own eyes. This story could have just as easily been written by a friend who acts as my story's deuteragonist, but it would be very... Siobhan, and I'm writing to you all the way from Delhi in India. I've been watching your videos and listening to your podcast for a long time now, partly as a way of improving my colloquial English, but I've only recently felt able to contribute. You see, I have my own scary story to share, one that details an event which I saw with my own eyes. This story could have just as easily been written by a friend who acts as my story's deuteragonist, but it would be very insensitive of me to ask her to dredge up a terrible, painful memory for the entertainment of others. So instead, and might I make it clear, with her blessing, I will tell the story of my friend. My best friend since primary school is a girl that I'll call Geeta, for the sake of her anonymity. Geeta and I lived right across the street from one another, but we didn't become friends until our 5th year of primary. Then after that, we were practically inseparable. Her studies, so they kept things casual, with the exception of period had concluded. But then, when summer came around, and Geeta actually started to spend time with this boy, she found that he wasn't nearly as charming and gentlemanly as he had been while they had just been texting and visiting in secret.
They had both expected to see each other a lot more. But Gita's boyfriend expected a lot more too, things Gita wasn't quite ready for. He insisted, but she refused, and after having a particularly intense disagreement over it, Gita decided that she was done with him. She told him via text whenever she talked about him. So for him to turn out to be a total disappointment, then act like such a child when she tried to break it off, I just felt awful for her. This went on for a few weeks, with Gita's ex being a total pain in the neck for her. Then one day, he simply gave up. He stopped trying to call her, he stopped texting her, and when he ceased all forms of contact for a full 3 days, Gita and I started to believe that he'd finally moved on. Then one day, one of Gita's ex-friends came looking for her to ask if she'd seen him over the past couple of days. She obviously hadn't, but her ex's friend looked very concerned and asked if she could give him a call to see where he was. Gita actually considers it too before she realized it was probably little more than a trick. Her ex had co-opted his friends in more than one scheme, so why would this be any different? She didn't call him or text him. He wasn't her responsibility, and even if he had run away and was off doing something stupid, it wasn't her problem. I know that sounds harsh, but emotional blackmail is a very under-discussed form of abuse, and it occurs between all kinds of people, not just couples, or former couples in this case. I said the same myself. Even if he is hiding away somewhere, drinking himself into a stupor and focusing on taking his own life, she can't intervene. Otherwise, he'll learn that all he has to do to get her attention is go back to some self-destructive spiral and terrify everyone into compliance. I know that sounds very deep for two 17-year-olds in their first relationship, but it's as true for teenagers as it is for the elderly. Age isn't a factor. So after that visit from her ex's friends, Gita tried to carry on as normal, and resisted the temptation to call her ex, even if it was just to tell him what a jerk he was being. Then one night, months later, just after 2 o'clock in the morning on the 15th of February, literally the day after Valentine's Day, myself and just about all my neighbors were woken up by shouting coming from outside in the street. I remember hearing it and at first thinking that it was just a drunk or something, but then when I lay my head back down, I heard my friend's name. "Gita!" They were calling out, over and over again. I'd like to say that I immediately knew who it was, but I think it was a mix of sleepiness and wishful thinking that had me hoping and wishing that it wasn't Gita's ex-boyfriend. But it was, and my heart sank when I came to that realization. Gita's ex was about to cause a hell of a lot of trouble for Gita, himself, and both of their families, and all because he'd had too much to drink and decided he'd missed her. I know that might sound not all that terrible, just a little bit of teenage angst relationship drama that everyone would either be laughing or cringing about in a few years. But looking back on it, that actually would have been one of the best case scenarios, and I don't think I could have conceived of how terrible things were about to get. "Gita," he kept screaming out, "come to your window, please, I need to talk to you." He didn't know Gita's bedroom was at the back of the house, and when the window opened up, it was her mother and father standing there, each looking absolutely livid. They started yelling at Gita's ex, telling him to go away and calling him some drunk. Everyone could see the bottle in his hand, and it was a large green beer bottle too, so there was no confusing it with anything else. I could see Gita's ex, and I could kind of see the window her mother and father were standing at, but I had a much better view of the ex than Gita's house. So I didn't see Gita, but from the way her ex started to behave, I had to assume that she appeared in the window for a moment because her ex went from trying to get her attention to actually talking to her directly, saying, "No, wait, Gita, listen to me, Gita," and just other such things. It was all just so embarrassing for him, for everyone involved, for everyone watching. But then his speech took a very drastic turn. Gita's ex said something like, "Always know that you did this. This is all your fault." And then he suddenly turned the beer bottle of what I thought was alcohol upside down over his head. I just remember thinking, oh no, please no. Hoping and praying it was just a way to get her attention. And it was exactly that, I suppose. A way of getting her attention, but it was the last thing he would ever do. I didn't see it in detail, but I saw him empty the bottle over himself. Then a second later, there was this sort of whoosh of flame that I'd heard from all the way across the street. And then there was screaming. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to see, I didn't want to hear. I just jumped back into bed, covered myself over, and stuffed my fingertips into my ears to try and block out all the sounds. Even though I only heard it for a few moments, hearing the sound of someone burning to death was the single worst thing I've ever heard in my entire life. The hour that followed is a little bit of a blur. I remember my mother coming into my room, then my father drawing the curtains and telling us both to go into the back bedroom. I was crying, trying to tell my mother what had happened, but not able to find the words. But I didn't have to, because they knew they'd seen the Human Torch outside, writhing around in the street on fire. Gita's ex later passed from these self-inflicted injuries, and everyone who heard the screams remained haunted by them for a very long time. Gita herself didn't recommence dating until she was in her mid-20s, and I don't blame her for taking so long to get back on her feet, so to speak. That boy had traumatized her, and he was haunting her. Not in the traditional sense of wandering spirits with unfinished business, but in the truest sense, in the sense that she saw his burning body and heard his screams whenever she closed her eyes at night, and it stayed that way for many years. On Valentine's Day of 1992, I was a 23-year-old wannabe musician living just outside of Redding, California. I had a part-time job at an auto shop 3 days a week, one that I had to get up at 7 a.m. for, and that year, Valentine's just so happened to fall on a Friday, which meant that I had to work from 8 until 3. But I'd also promised my then-girlfriend that I'd treat her to some special Valentine's Day dinner, complete with gifts and a trip to the movies. Meaning that I had around 1.5 hours to get home, freshen up, pick up all my girlfriend's gifts, and then pick her up at work on time. I wasn't looking forward to doing all that rushing around. I was kicking myself for not being more prepared, and I remember driving to work hoping that I might be able to clock out early or something. But then, when I show up at work, all the shutters are down and my boss's truck is nowhere to be seen. I figured that he was probably running a little late, which was way out of character for him, but I didn't immediately assume anything was wrong or anything like that. I just stayed put in my car, leaned back in the seat, and tried to catch a little extra shut-eye until I heard his truck roll into the lot. Next thing I know, I'm catching myself falling asleep, and when I open my eyes, it's almost 8:30 a.m. I've been sitting in that parking lot for almost 35 minutes, and my boss, who practically lived at the auto shop, just hadn't shown up for some reason. I had his home phone number written down somewhere, but this was in a journal back at my apartment, so instead of just sitting there like an idiot, I drove back to my apartment and gave him a call on my home phone. There was no answer at his place, so I left a message on his machine, then basically kind of just sat there, not knowing what to do. On the one hand, if my boss was sick or was off doing something and hadn't planned to open the shop that day, then it was no big deal at all. In fact, it was a blessing, because I had time to go buy my girlfriend her gifts and whatnot. But then no one called me, and I felt like I'd have known if we were going to be closed that day, because I wouldn't have been all stressed out about the time. So instead of doing just nothing, I decided to give one of my coworkers a call, just to make sure that we weren't opening like an hour later that morning or whatever. But then he says the same thing. He hadn't gotten any calls, and as far as he knew, we were opening up at the regular time that morning. I then tell him about showing up to a shut shop and our boss not showing up even though I waited a while. I remember how there was a bit of a pause on the line as my coworker thought it over for a few seconds, and then he asked me, "Are you free to do something right now?" I obviously didn't have anything else planned, but then I also wanted to know what he was about to ask me, so I told him something like, maybe. It depends on what that something is. It turns out all he wanted to do was head over to our boss's house to see if he was okay, and since I figured that it'd take minimal time at best and was definitely the mature call, I agreed to head over there with him. About 10 to 15 minutes later, he pulls up outside my parents' place, honks his horn, and I run out and jump in his passenger seat. My coworker seems kind of tense, but other than that, we're still just two dudes on their way over to check on our boss. 'Cause like I said, not just showing up for work like that was way out of character for our boss. And the drive over to his place takes maybe 20 minutes, long enough for my coworker to get pretty worried, I think. I was still kind of looking on the bright side at the time, thinking maybe we might get the day off or something, and I suggested to my coworker that on the way over. He shot the idea right out of the sky, though, saying that the auto shop was our boss's life, how he only ever took Sundays off, and how if he was sick, he would have 100% called us to let us know and probably run things ourselves. And by the end of his little speech, I felt like a total jerk for even thinking about a day off, and was glad that I'd taken him up on the whole checking in on our boss thing. So, a few minutes later, we're turning off onto the road that our boss lives on, and although the houses aren't exactly huge, they're all nicely spaced out with privacy fences, big green hedges, and all that kind of stuff. We get to the house that belongs to our boss, and the moment we pull into the driveway, both me and my coworker get this really bad feeling, because our boss's door is just wide open and his truck is nowhere to be seen. I remember we both sat there on our seats, not saying a word, just looking at that wide open door. It wasn't some big red flag or anything, but that level of worry definitely got ramped up just a little more. Just not nearly as much as when my coworker reaches over, opens up his glove box, and pulls out a gun. I'd grown up around guns, so seeing one didn't freak me out or anything. It was the implication in that moment that had me afraid. I think I knew why he pulled it out too, but at the same time, I asked him what the heck was going on. My coworker told me to wait in the car, which immediately had me thinking, why the hell did you ask me to come along then? But then it hit me. He needed me there, just in case anything happened to him. He left his keys in the ignition, told me to shift over to the driver's seat, and that if he didn't come out in 5 minutes, to drive off and get the cops. I think up until that point, I'd never known what it meant to be truly terrified. I mean, I'd been afraid of all kinds of things, getting rejected by girls, getting picked up by the cops with some weed on me, or getting jumped on the way home from school. But I only think the word terror or terrified applies when there's a legitimate danger to human life. When my coworker got out of his car and walked towards our boss's house, there was a chance that he might never walk out again, and that was truly terrifying to me. It did occur to me that he could have been slightly overreacting, but by that point, he was already out of the car. And maybe that was wishful thinking on my part, my brain's way of doing a little psychological damage control. But either way, I watched him walk into the house, gun drawn, not knowing what the hell was about to happen. A few minutes later, my coworker comes walking out of the house, and he only makes it a few steps off the porch before he doubles over and starts puking. And that's when I knew at that moment that our boss was dead. Or at least that there had been some kind of dead body in there or something. Nobody just walks out of a house and throws up unless they've seen something truly messed up. And honestly, right then in that moment, I was really glad that he told me to sit in that car and not follow him into the house. The second he started to puke, I got out of the car and started asking what the hell was inside. And just like before, I think I already knew what he was going to say on some level. I just needed to hear it from him. He never said exactly what it was. He just told me our boss was dead, and that we needed to hang around and wait for the cops because he just called them on his home phone. I remember standing there behind his driver's side door, probably with some dumb, stupefied look on my face. I'd never been in a situation like that before, never even anything approaching something like that. It sort of didn't feel real either, like it was real for my coworker because he saw it, But for me, I don't know. It's like I wanted to see what was in that house just to confirm it wasn't some elaborate prank or something. But then, unless my coworker had just delivered an Oscar-winning acting performance, unless the entire morning had been some elaborate setup, what was happening was real, and I sure as hell didn't want to see what had made my coworker empty his guts out. I didn't know what else to say, so I asked how our boss died. And my coworker was still wiping his mouth on his t-shirt and spitting out the last of his puke when he told me in a very nasally voice, "Murder." I repeated back to him, "Murder?" Because I just could not believe what I was hearing at that moment. I thought maybe it had been some kind of accident, and unlike my coworker, I didn't immediately conclude that there was some kind of human threat involved. Hell, one of the first things that went through my head when my coworker said our boss was dead was that he had taken his own life. He could have blown his own head off with a shotgun, which sure as hell would have made me puke if it had been me walking in on the aftermath. But when my coworker said murder and nodded when I turned the word back on him in a question, that was the question of, how did he know it was murder? I only asked one more question to my coworker that morning before the cops showed up. I mean, that was the one that I just asked. How could he be so sure that it was murder? The answer that came back is one that I'll remember for the rest of my life. He's taped to a chair. Not long after that, the cops did show up, by which point my coworker had put his gun back in his glove compartment. And we both talked to the cops for a minute or two, then one of them went inside the house to look around. He came back out a minute or two later, not puking but definitely shaken. We talked to the cops a little more, gave them our contact info, then after that, we were told that we were free to leave. I remember wondering what was going to happen over the next few days, and when I asked my coworker what we should do now, he told me, file for unemployment. I asked him if we should get lawyers or something, if the cops might think that we did it or something, and he told me that he didn't think that it'd be necessary. He was right about both. The cops only got in touch with us once more, and the auto shop took years to find a buyer so it could reopen. But to me, that was just small stuff. I could find another job, and I did, pretty easily actually, but we both still wanted to know what had happened to our boss, or more accurately, why it had happened, which as it turned out was bizarrely easy for the cops. So remember, I said our boss's truck was missing when we showed up at his place. Well, it had been stolen by these two drug addicts who had the bright idea of doing a little home invasion on Valentine's Day Eve. They'd heard, very inaccurately, that our boss was loaded, and that he had a bunch of gold bars or something stashed away in his house. He didn't, and he tells them that, but they didn't believe him. So they taped him to his computer chair, took off his shoes and socks, and began torturing him to get him to fess up. Obviously, he didn't have anything stashed away, and apparently he even offered to take them to an ATM so they would at least stop burning his feet with lighters and lit cigarettes. But no. They want the non-existent gold bars or bonds or whatever the hell they were looking for, so they kept on working their way up his legs until they got to his junk. I heard someplace that they were still torturing the guy when his heart just gave up and gave out on them. But still, they didn't want to leave empty-handed. So these two animals then took the keys to his truck and drove around trying to sell the thing in Reading. They didn't even drive to the next town over to throw the cops off their scent. And so a few hours after we spoke to the cops, some patrol unit was pulling over my boss's truck and arresting the two pieces of human trash who were in it. The female half of the couple later told the cops that the only reason they went looking for this big score like that was so she and her man could buy each other Valentine's Day gifts. To me, that's the only truly bizarre aspect of this whole thing. Once the people who killed him were arrested, they told the cops everything, down to the dumbest little details like that. I've heard that's like a thing with these meth heads, that they're prone to spill their guts to cops and stuff when other drug users can actually keep quiet and actually dodge charges. I don't know how true it is, but it seemed to have applied in their case. But then I've also heard the cops will dangle detox drugs in front of meth and heroin addicts, telling them that their jailhouse withdrawals won't be so bad if they only give up a little info. The point is, all the details came out in the months that followed, and I remember seeing the news about the pair getting sentenced around the holidays of that same year. Both got life in prison. But if you ask me, they should have dug a hole under that goddamn prison and thrown those two animals in there with no food or water until they just shriveled up and died. Anything else, in the face of what they did to my friend and my boss, seems like a slap on the wrist. My name is Brian. I'm from Ohio, and I've finally gotten around to typing up a story I've been wanting to share with you for quite some time. During late 2021 and early 2022, I started dating the girl who would later become my fiancée. I think a major episode in our dating timeline was around Valentine's Day of 2022. We'd only been talking for around 4 months at that time, so it wasn't a huge occasion for us or anything, but it also constituted a great opportunity to romance her a little. We both had work on Monday, which was the 14th, and that didn't really leave much room for whining and dining. So instead, we made plans to have dinner on the 12th, which was a Saturday night, so we could actually make the most of the occasion. I didn't mention anything about Valentine's Day, although I'm sure the implication was clear. But what I also didn't mention was that I was planning on booking a table at an extremely high-end fine dining establishment. I then went out and bought a whole bunch of her favorite snacks, just about anything she'd mentioned enjoying during our text exchange. I figured a bunch of small, fairly low-key gifts like that would demonstrate that I was a good listener, which, as much as that's kind of a dating cliché, is still super important in a relationship. Anyway, I make all the arrangements under the pretense of our destination being a surprise, and come the Saturday in question, she's under the impression that we are headed to this Italian place we'd been to once or twice before. Then, all of a sudden, I hit her with the old switcheroo, then take her to our actual destination, which was the fine dining place where I'd booked us a tasting menu. I'd never been to any place like that before, so I was actually super excited to try all the fancy food that was on the tasting menu. Even arriving at the restaurant and having the European waiting staff take our coats and escort us to our table, I could totally see why people pay for that kind of experience. It's not just all about the food. It's about the atmosphere and the service coming together to create truly special memories. And you can bet your bottom dollar that me and my future fiancé got a special memory of that night. It just wasn't the one we expected to have. So I think we're on our 4th course of 18, having a great time when the maitre d' seats another couple at the next table over. They look to be doing the same thing as us, having their early Valentine's dinner, only around 10 to 15 minutes after they sit down. The mood at their table became far from romantic, though. It started with a few sort of rude comments, things that made me and my future fiancé look up at each other with this sort of awkward kind of expression. But as the minutes ticked on by, things started to get worse and worse. They kept the volume down at first, but things got pretty vicious real quickly, to the point where one of the waiters came over to try and calm the situation down. It worked for like a minute. Then the guy said something under his breath to the girl, and she stormed out of the restaurant. By that point, pretty much everyone in the restaurant was either aware of the tension in the room or was actively watching it unfold from their side eye. I'd seen plenty of public freakouts, just never anything in anywhere so fancy, so as much as I was kind of annoyed that they were ruining our experience, my future fiancée didn't seem all that disappointed. She wasn't strictly enjoying it, she just tried to look on the bright side and made me smile when she whispered, "Dinner and a show. You are treating me this evening." I think that's one of those moments that I knew that she was the one. When she knew how upset I'd be if I thought some total idiots had ruined our special evening and chose to brush it off like it was nothing. She was just as disappointed as I was. She just knew how much it'd mean to me if she'd failed to show it. Anyway, after the girl stormed out of the restaurant, the guy stayed seated for a minute or two and then followed his girl outside. We figured that was the end of the show, but no. A few minutes later, the couple walked back into the dining room by the maitre d' and then reseated. It was actually almost comical, seeing everyone in the dining room trying to contain their disappointment at seeing these weirdos return. But I remember just genuinely hoping they'd smooth over whatever they were fighting about. I was dating seriously for the first time in my life, like actively looking for someone to settle down with, so seeing the marital discord that I feared being played out right there in front of me, it gave me this totally different kind of negative feeling when they started bickering for a second time. I honestly thought that's how the whole evening was going to go. This sort of toxic couple were going to poison the atmosphere completely, not having the good manners to argue elsewhere instead of in front of an entire dining room. But that's not what happened. All of a sudden, the girl gets up again, just like she did when she stormed out just a few minutes before. But then instead of just walking out of the restaurant, she stops, turns around, and takes off one of her high heels. The guy that she's with isn't looking at all. He's doing that thing of refusing to look back as she's walking away. Maybe out of pride, or maybe because he was looking at the menu, I don't know. But either way, he's about the only person in the dining room who doesn't see his girlfriend or wife or whatever pulling off one of her high heels, then taking hold of it like some weapon. By the time we all realized what she was planning, it was too late for anyone to do anything. The girl swung that shoe right at the guy's head, so the heel connected full force with his skull. And the sound that it made was nuts, way more muted and dull than I had expected, not a crack or a crunch at all. And then, instead of collapsing onto the table in front of him or just falling limp out of his chair, the guy just goes rigid. He almost propelled himself out of his chair, sending all kinds of glasses flying off the table in the process. Then, when he hit the floor, he started shaking and convulsing like he was having some kind of seizure. People started jumping into action, restraining the girl and rushing over to the guy, who by that point was bleeding all over the floor too, and my future fiancé was one of them. She was a registered nurse, and she knew exactly what to do, or rather, exactly what not to do when it came to the appropriate medical treatment. She told the waiters to drag the table away, so nothing else could fall onto the guy, and she took my jacket to cushion his head. After that, she basically just stayed with the guy until he stopped having this seizure, and the EMTs arrived to take him to the hospital. I don't know what happened to the girl. I didn't see her getting arrested or anything, and although people intervened to keep her from hitting the guy a second time, I don't think anyone tried to force her to stay. Probably because they were just scared that she'd hit them with the sharp end of that high-heel shoe as well. And since the very horrifying effects were on display for all to see, I sort of understand why no one thought to just tackle her, or whatever. It was scary, legitimately frightening to see both the sudden escalation of violence and the effect that it had on the guy. It really drove the point home to me that real-life violence is much, much different to the kind that we're used to seeing on movies or TV. A few years ago, I met this guy on Tinder that I really liked, and we eventually went on a few dates together. We were talking for weeks, and our first date was nice, but then our second date fell almost exactly on Valentine's Day, and if I'm being honest, I was pretty excited about it. I just had no idea how things were about to take a pretty drastic turn. During the time we were talking, there were a lot of little red flags. He would tell me he drank too much, but I was a lot younger and naive back then and tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. We were in our early 20s, so I figured he just liked to party and it wasn't a problem. But what he didn't mention was the very specific effect that alcohol had on him. So on the night of our date, we were in a bar getting drinks and stuff, and he pulls out his phone very rudely, I might say, in the middle of a conversation. I asked him what was so important, and he tells me something like, "I'm trying to find us a way out of here." As you can imagine, I respond by saying, "You're doing what?" Thinking that it might have been like a joke or something. But no, he was deadly serious and started telling me how the security guards for the bar were, and I'm using his words here, after him. So I'm like, okay, let's go back to my car so maybe we can just go somewhere else, naively believing that he genuinely had beef with one or two of them. My car was parked pretty far away. I was staying pretty sober at that point because we had gone to multiple locations that night, so it took us a few minutes to walk there, but in that time, my date gets it into his head that multiple people are after him. I'm talking like random people on the street. Then once we're in a part of downtown that wasn't so busy, he started to think that I was out to get him too. I was trying to call his friend who was nearby to come get him, but he took my phone away from me because he thought I was calling the cops. Then, when I demanded that he return it, he started physically threatening me. I got so scared because I thought, if he hurts me here and leaves me here, nobody's gonna find me until morning, and it was really cold out. His friend eventually came and got him, and I left. Once I was safe, I was jittery all night from the anxiety, having been in rocky relationships in the past. I told him about it the next morning, and he didn't remember any of it, so I broke things off shortly after because I just did not have the time or energy to be dealing with anything like that. I feel like if I'd have carried on dating him, it'd only be a matter of time before he turned on me, physically, I mean, and then it wouldn't be so easy to just walk away. Not that I wouldn't be able to, he just struck me as the kind of guy who wouldn't let me leave, and I have far too much self-respect to get stuck in a situation like that. Back when I was in my late teens and still painfully naive, I accepted an invitation to go on a Valentines cinema date with a guy that I met on Tinder. He seemed really nice at first, but when we got to said cinema and the lights went down, he started trying to shove his hand right up my skirt. For almost the whole film, he kept trying it on, and I kept having to tell him no over and over again. He wasn't forceful at all, but he just kept doing it like a bloody child or something. After every no, he'd just wait a few minutes and then try it again, like all I needed was a few minutes and I'd be all good on then and let him do it. It gave me the ick really badly, so when he drove me home, I was in no mood to see him again. I lived in Halls at the time, and he asked if he was okay to use the toilet before driving home. Then, for some reason, instead of just telling him no and to duck into a bush somewhere, I very stupidly said, sure, why not, and let him in to use my toilet. But then, once it came to getting him to leave, he wouldn't. I lied to him and said, look, I had a really nice time, but you have to go because I got uni in the morning. I didn't think anyone in their right mind would refuse to pick up on that kind of social clue. But then, turns out this guy barely had a brain at all, let alone a good one. He just kept smiling and shaking his head, saying, no, I want to stay for a bit. I'll leave before you go to bed. Then when I told him I want to go to bed now, he started making all these terrible comments like, well, why can't I join you? At this point, my heart was pounding in my chest and I didn't know what to do. He said he had a really nice time and basically pushed me onto my bed and started kissing me. I pushed him away as nicely as possible and started calling out for help. That really shocked him. He must have thought that I didn't have it in me to make a scene like that, and you could see how embarrassed he was. Thankfully, that meant that he just walked out of the room and then the building, as he didn't want to get caught after trying to force himself on me. He then left and I locked the door behind him. I didn't sleep that night and was terrified that he'd break in or something. Thankfully he didn't, and the only time I ever heard from him again was the last text that he sent me, calling me a prude B-word who led him on for a free trip to the cinema. None of that really bothered me. I knew my intentions had been pure and that it was him that had tried to turn our date into a freaking fondle fest. What bothered me was that I had to live and study in a place where this guy lived. I didn't properly relax until I moved out of halls and into a student house for second year, and for months, that psycho had known where I slept. So to finally live in the comfort of knowing that he had no idea where I was, that was a relief. So from the ages of 18 to 36, I was in a committed relationship. But then, long story short, we ended up getting divorced and I was thrust into the very unpleasant world of online dating. I tried a little OkCupid at one point and ended up meeting a really cute guy who was totally my type. He had lots of tattoos, he worked out, and he was at least a foot taller than me. But he also loved John Carpenter films and a bunch of horror movies too, which is a huge passion of mine. And we chatted on and off for a month or so, but we lived an hour apart, so we waited until we were super sure that we wanted to hook up, and then made arrangements for the most romantic day of the year, Valentine's Day. It wasn't anything too fancy, we just went to a bar to shoot some pool, but then the drunker he got, the more this totally different side of him started to emerge, and it was one that I didn't enjoy at all. At one point he starts pulling my hair, I'm guessing in a way that he thought was sexy and that I'd enjoy. Well, needless to say, it wasn't sexy, and I didn't enjoy it. And then 2 hours and 2 drinks in, and I was ready to just get the hell out of there. Then, when I asked him to give me a ride home, he tried to get me to do something that I really did not want to do. And I fought my way out of it, basically threatening to scream bloody murder and scramble to my car and drive home. I knew I was lucky that he let me go, and I had no intention of ever seeing this weirdo again. But then the next day, I'm getting my stuff ready for work and realized that I'd lost my ID somewhere. I searched my apartment, nothing. I called the bar, nothing. Then it slowly dawns on me that the creep I was with the night before was the one that had my ID. Either when it had accidentally fallen out of my purse during that struggle, or when he'd deliberately taken it for whatever godforsaken reason. But then, when I call him, he claims that he doesn't have it either. But he does have a lecture for me about how I'm a tease, and that's why I'm single, because I just lead guys on. I just want my ID, but he denies that he has it, so screw it. I guess I'll just get another one. My lost ID shows up in my mailbox a week later in a plain envelope that had not been mailed. The idea that he was outside my house without my knowledge really creeped me out. It took me a good while to realize what had actually happened, to be honest. I went home and didn't tell anybody until a few days later. And then my friend was like, "Wait, so he tried to do what to you?" I was like, "Yeah, I guess I dodged a cannonball as opposed to a bullet." And then the day after the date that I had to contact him about the ID, it was a time when the $35 to replace it was actually a lot of money to me. So I called him, and he was so absolutely in his opinion that I had wronged him somehow by not hooking up with him in a crappy dive bar parking lot, and he said that I could have at least put out. I didn't do anything about it, I just never contacted him again. It's not like it hasn't happened before, just in more subtle versions. I never had anybody just try it. It was usually the kissing that turns into pressure to do something more. I've never had anyone forcibly try to make me do stuff with them or try to take my clothing off, just verbal and mental pressure. But anyway, I freely admit that I have terrible taste in men, and that's why I'm currently celibate. I can't trust myself, and it took way too long to accept that, but I'm working on myself. On Valentine's Day back in 1982, an Arizona state trooper was walking along the side of Interstate Highway 40. He was searching for the remains of a blown-out tire which had been lost during a recent traffic accident that occurred near the Monte Carlo truck stop, around 11 miles away from Williams, Arizona. As the officer continued to search, he found himself approaching a cedar tree, having spotted something half buried in the soil beneath it. But it was not a blown-out tire. Lying face down in the dirt was the lifeless body of an unidentified young woman. She had apparently been dragged around 25 feet from the nearby interstate, and lying next to the corpse was a white sweater with red stripes, a white bra, and a white handkerchief. Larger sections of the girl's face and right ear, as well as her hands and feet, had been eaten away by animals, making fingerprint identification completely impossible. Coroners later determined that the girl had been dead for around 2 weeks before she was discovered, and that the cause of death was most likely suffocation or asphyxiation, as her hyoid bone had not been broken, and there were no other significant indications of physical trauma. Since it was impossible to identify her, and in light of the date her corpse was discovered, the authorities nicknamed the girl Valentine Sally instead of the usual Jane Doe. In an effort to identify their nameless victim, police officers canvassed the surrounding area in the hopes of garnering clues. One witness claimed to have given Valentine Sally a ride after spotting her hitchhiking around Cords Junction, which is around an hour's drive away from Flagstaff, Arizona. The witness claimed that the hitchhiker's journey had started in Phoenix Valley, and that she was employed as a dishwasher at a restaurant there. She also claimed to have a family in the state of New Jersey, and that she intended on traveling there due to trouble in her home life. Her plan was to make it all the way to the Little America truck stop in Flagstaff, where she would hitch a ride further east with any truckers headed in that direction. Days later, a woman named Patty Wilkins contacted law enforcement, claiming that she'd spotted the Valentine Sally on February 4th, when she arrived at her family's truck stop in the company of a much older man. This truck stop, the Monte Carlo, was the same one Valentine Sally's body was found in the vicinity of just 10 days later. Patty claimed to have found the situation deeply suspicious and approached the girl to ask if she needed any assistance. The girl refused and seemed more than happy to remain in the trucker's company, yet complained of a very severe toothache. Patty then applied some crushed-up aspirin to the girl's tooth, a substance which was later found in the tooth cavity of Valentine Sally. Patty Wilkins was then shown pictures of the clothes found at the scene of the crime. All matched those that the mystery hitchhiker had been wearing on the day that she visited the Monte Carlo. 3 years later, Valentine Sally was falsely identified as Melody Eugenia Cutlip, who disappeared from Istachata, Florida in 1980. A forensic dentist compared the bite marks between the two women and announced that they'd found a match. The same dentist apparently reconstructed the faces of both Valentine Sally and Melody Cutlip before declaring a significant level of resemblance between the two girls. Melody's mother famously refused to believe the body belonged to her daughter, and although many claim this was the result of untamable grief, she was later vindicated when her daughter returned home during the summer of 1986. Along with their attempts to identify Valentine Sally, authorities worked tirelessly to identify the trucker she'd been spotted with just hours prior to her death. The man was described as being middle-aged, between the ages of 50 and 60 years old, and was thought to be sporting a two-toned leather vest with a checkered pattern, along with a black felt cowboy hat that had a peacock feather tucked into it. Based on a physical description given by Patty Wilkins, the police commissioned a series of composite sketches, many of which seemed to resemble Royal Russell Long, a convicted kidnapper and suspected serial killer who was given 2 life sentences in 1985 for his involvement in the abduction of 2 teenage girls. Sadly, Long has since passed away in prison, meaning if he was Valentine Sally's killer, he will never face justice for his unforgivable crimes. In 2005, the case of Valentine Sally was handed over to the Coconino County Cold Case team, who vowed to continue the efforts of both identifying her and catching her killer. Then, in 2018, when the Golden State Killer was positively identified due to extensive forensic testing, the Cold Case team saw an opportunity to finally uncover the truth of Valentine Sally's identity. They reached out to Barbara Venter, the genealogist who worked on the Golden State Killer case, to help build a profile based on Valentine Sally's DNA. The team then compared Sally's DNA to that of multiple individuals throughout the area and managed to track down one of her relatives. From there, they followed bloodlines down to one particular family living in Missouri and discovered that one of their number had disappeared around 1979. This girl had a history of running away from home and had charges on her juvenile record that had never been expunged. Finally, on February 22nd of 2021, almost 40 years to the day since Sally's body was discovered, the Coconino Cold Case team held a very important press conference. They announced that, after decades of tireless work, Valentine Sally had been officially identified as 17-year-old Carolyn Celeste Eaton of Bellefontaine Neighbors, Missouri. Apparently, the last time Carolyn and her family were together was on Christmas Day of 1981, when they discovered her in the company of two strange men. This led to a confrontation between Carolyn and her parents, and she responded by running away from home for the umpteenth time. Her parents assumed that she'd return in the usual time frame, when she either ran out of money or realized her mistake. Little did they know, they'd never see their little girl ever again. In an interview following the long-awaited identification, Patty Wilkins stated that she was haunted by Carolyn's murder and felt like she was her last, best chance of salvation. "I knew something was off," she told a journalist. "I just knew it. Even when she told me she didn't need any help, I could sense something wasn't right. But I didn't do anything. At least, I didn't do enough. And I guess that's a regret that I'll just have to learn to live with." Patty added that Carolyn and the man she was spotted with appeared to be close, almost as if they'd been friends for a while. She also stated that she wouldn't be surprised if Carolyn's killer was someone her family were aware of, and supposedly asked the reporter, "If you ever find out who did it, tell me, so I can go stamp on their toes." Carolyn Eaton was eventually given a proper burial at Mountain View Cemetery just outside the town of Williams, Arizona. She lies under a very unusual-looking headstone, one that stands in stark contrast with those around it. Instead of a dull gray slab of stone, Carolyn's marker is a large, bright red heart which depicts the names Valentines Sally as well as Carolyn Eaton. This is to signify that no matter how long a person is missing for, no matter how long they're referred to by Jane Doe or any other morbid nickname, they will not stay that way forever. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. EST, and super fun live streams every Sunday and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit r/Let'sReadOfficial or over email, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, Dracula! This July will mark the 6th wedding anniversary of my husband and I. I just want to say for the record that I'm incredibly happy, and that was the best decision I had ever made in my life. Now that I said that, I will say that we almost didn't make it to our wedding day because of a poor choice made by my then fiancé. Anybody who has ever gotten married knows that it's an obnoxious amount of planning. Even weddings on a smaller scale can cost a lot of money and take months of planning. I was stressed out of my mind trying to plan this wedding, and I told my fiancé to just worry about the photographer and I'll take care of everything else. I think it's also worth saying that I wanted it that way. I love him to death, but if it was up to him, we would have tacos and nothing but 80s music at the wedding. That may sound like a fun party, but I'm sorry, not for our wedding. I gave him a list of great photographers that I've seen online or recommended to me by my coworkers and friends. All he had to do was pick one that he liked from our budget, and everything else would be taken care of. One night, he came home from work excited, like he just won the lottery. He told me that he was talking to a coworker, and this man suggested that he use someone that he knows to be the photographer. He was well under our budget and shot weddings before. I didn't love the idea because I didn't get to see any portfolios or anything like that, so I didn't even know if this guy had a camera. My fiancé assured me that he saw his work and that he did a good job. The only reason he wasn't listed anywhere online is because it was his side job, and he was just trying to make money and hopefully turn it into a career. I was instantly sketched out by the idea, but I trusted him. My husband, then fiancé, had a great and horrible quality that allows him to see the good in people. I wasn't thrilled, but it was done, and I guess the positive was that we were saving a lot of money. Not far from the wedding, I still hadn't met the guy and I wasn't happy. I was starting to get anxious that this guy might not show up or something. I begged my fiancé to set up a meeting so that I could meet the guy. We met at the park where we were going to get married, and the guy was strange, and I know that sounds mean, but he just gave off that vibe. He had gross, dirty, and long fingernails. He was missing some teeth in the front, and I would guess that he was at least 40 years old. Based on the way my fiancé described him, I was picturing a young guy, not some grizzled older guy. He didn't say much and just kind of nodded along with what I was saying. I felt uncomfortable because it seemed like he was staring at me strangely. I tried to tell myself that I was just imagining it because his appearance was a little off, but I couldn't shake that feeling. He ended the meeting by showing me some pictures that he had taken for his portfolio. I expected to see some wedding photos, but they were weird. Some strange artsy photos of things like decay and dead animals and even buildings on fire. Finally, he showed me some wedding photos at the end, and admittedly, they were beautiful shots, which put me a little bit at ease. Now, about a month away from the wedding, my girls and I went to Ocean City, Maryland for the bachelorette party. We rented a beautiful condo on the ocean and we planned on spending the days on the beach and the nights partying in town. It was an amazing time until late Saturday afternoon. While we were on the beach, one of my friends said that she could see some creepy guy seemingly taking pictures in our direction. The guy was standing outside the building, facing us. There was a lot of distance and beach between the man and us, so I just assumed that he was taking pictures of the ocean. My friend couldn't relax, though. She finally got up and said that she was going to confront this guy, just for peace of mind. She and another friend walked all the way over to the man, and I could see them talking. After a couple of nods, the man walked away, and my friends walked back to us. She said that he was just taking pictures of the ocean, and he even showed them. He apologized for freaking them out and said that he would walk further down and take pictures there. I smiled and gloated to my friends for a minute, telling them that I had told them so. And it wasn't until we were walking back that my one friend said something that really freaked me out. She said, "That photographer guy was creepy though. Ew, and did you see his fingernails? It was disgusting." And right away, I thought about our photographer for the wedding. I told myself that it was just a coincidence, but the feeling in my gut was not a coincidence. That night, we went to one of the local bars, and every time I saw someone take a picture, I felt my adrenaline kick in. I was freaked out, and the longer the night went on, the more freaked out that I became. I told the girls that I wanted to go back to the condo, and when we got back, we decided to make some drinks there and just talk. Around 1 a.m., we heard a knock on the back door. We all looked at each other kind of in disbelief and thought, there's no way someone's knocking at this time, right? We weren't that loud. As a group, we all huddled around the door, and when we opened it, nobody was there. We thought that either some kids were playing some joke on us or we were all just going nuts. We decided to go to bed not long after that moment. Now, maybe 30 or 40 minutes later, I heard one of my friends scream. She had been sleeping on the couch since we were one bedroom short. When we all ran into the living room, there was some guy just standing there with a camera. I was stunned at what I was seeing. It was my wedding photographer, just standing there, and through all the chaos, he just kept saying, "I just figured you guys want some pictures. I'm only trying to take pictures, so just relax." One of my friends grabbed a knife from the kitchen and started to chase this man out of the condo. We immediately called the authorities and explained everything to them. The following day, we returned home and I angrily recounted the incident to my fiancé. And while I understand it was not his fault and he couldn't have known, I was upset with him at that moment. The local police were informed, and before long, the man responsible was apprehended. His excuse that he was merely attempting to take our pictures and didn't intend to frighten us or break in didn't hold up. Fortunately, we managed to find another photographer in time for the wedding, and I quickly realized that my fiancé wasn't to blame. My advice to young couples planning weddings is to always ensure that you're familiar with the individuals you hire, because sometimes trying to save money can turn out to be the worst decision of your life. Wedding season is always a lucrative time of year for me. I work for some fancy reception hall that hosts weddings pretty much every Friday and Saturday from May until October. Some events are fun and others are horrible. Since the company is small and family-owned, they try and do everything themselves. When it was becoming too much, they hired me. I'm basically a glorified handyman. I help set up the weddings, help assist with wiring, and most importantly, I'm the guy who stays late and cleans everything up, especially on Friday nights, since Saturday another wedding will be taking place right after. I always like weddings that are small and quiet because then I'm not spending hours cleaning up the place, since those folks tend to be a bit more reserved. But in the story I'm about to tell you, it was the exact opposite. It was a gigantic wedding. Hundreds of people were there, and we were at max capacity. As the night progressed, I could see the people getting more and more drunk and rambunctious. I was trying to clean and pick up in the background while everyone was dancing and having a good time, but there was only so much cleanup work that I can do with a building full of people. I decided to take a long break and just rest my eyes for a bit while the wedding was still going on. I woke up 45 minutes later, and then I noticed the time. The wedding would end in about 20 minutes or so, and I could get going on my cleanup work. I grabbed my headphones and made my way from the parking lot to the building. As I made the long walk up the hill, I was disgusted right away. Outside, it looked like a music festival had just come through. There was trash and empty bottles everywhere. I even saw a girl lying on the grass, snoring. I went inside and the band was still playing, and the inside was just as bad as the outside. Tables and chairs had been flipped over, bottles and cans were everywhere, and even plates and napkins were just littered all over the floor. I was kinda angry. My bosses, the couple that owned the place, came up to me before the end of the wedding and apologized and told me that if I did a good job tonight, they would pay me extra, and I could take next Friday off. Now I was mad, but it seemed like a fair trade-off. It took forever, but they finally started to empty out the place. Thankfully, they hired a bus to transport them wherever they were going because these people were in no position to drive. They only had 2 small party buses, so they would have to make 2 trips to pick up everyone. I was trying to pick up the tables and chairs, but because some people were still left behind waiting, they were throwing things and just being inconsiderate people. An hour and a half after the official ending time of the wedding, everyone was finally gone, and my bosses went home for the evening. And this is the time of the night that I don't mind. Being alone, with my headphones working, is peaceful for me, and since I knew that I was going to be there a long time picking up after this party, I needed this peaceful time to just kinda wind down. I started outside and went from side to side, picking up trash and fixing all the patio furniture. That took a while, and then I went inside and started on the inside. It started to get cold outside, so I shut the door and continued my work. A while later, my wireless headphones died, and I figured that I would just use the speaker from my phone since nobody was around anyway. When I placed the phone on one of the tables, I noticed something strange. The door to the venue was wide open, and I distinctly remember shutting it. I went over and shouted into the air to see if anyone was there, and of course, I heard nothing back. It was kind of windy out, so I didn't think that it was that outlandish of an idea that maybe the wind had knocked it open since I didn't lock it. It had never happened before, but it doesn't mean it was impossible. I made some trips back and forth from the main hall to the kitchen. I was just about done for the night, and I noticed that the door was open again. Now I felt uncomfortable and figured maybe the owner was around and I was just being stupid and didn't realize it. I called out the owner's name several times, but I heard nothing back. I'm not an easily spooked guy, so my rational brain was telling me that everything was fine, and I just need to finish up, lock the door, and just be out. So that's exactly what I did. Once I finished, I locked the door and started walking to my car. When it was only about 30 or 40 feet away from the building, I saw the reflection of the light shine off the glass. I stopped on a dime because I knew I had turned the lights off. I turned around and saw the lights were shining brightly through the windows. I ran back, unlocked the door, and standing in the middle of the room was a man. He had suit pants on and a white buttoned-up shirt with his tie loosened. Strangely, he wasn't wearing any shoes or socks, though. I could clearly see right away that this guy just wasn't right. His eyes appeared to be half open, and even though he wasn't moving, he was sort of swaying back and forth. I asked if he was okay, and in a mumbling but angry-sounding voice, he said, "Where's my jacket? I want my jacket." Clearly, this man had too much to drink and seemed to be left behind. I tried to be civil and tell the guy to just relax and I'll help him out. I put my head down for a second to call the owner, and at that moment that I had my head down, I heard his bare feet running hard on the ground. I looked up, and he was running in the opposite direction of where I was standing. He ran into the kitchen, still screaming about his jacket. I called the owner and told him what was happening, and he said that he would be right down since he only lived about 100 yards away. And while I was talking to the owner on the phone, I described this man so the owner could try and contact someone from the wedding. He called the best man since we had his contact information as well as the bride and groom, and thankfully he was still awake. My boss told him about the guy and described his appearance. The best man said he didn't recognize the description of the person at the wedding, but since there were so many people, he said it might be possible that he was still there, left behind. While I was waiting for my boss to come back to the venue, I decided to go into the kitchen and try to communicate with this guy. I turned the lights on, and I heard the scampering of the bare feet again on the ground. I turned in the direction of the noise, and lunging at me with a steak knife was the man. In that brief moment, I was able to block that swing and just crawl out of the kitchen and slam the door. This all happened in, I would say, only a matter of seconds. My heart was racing, and this man began to beat on the door, and all I could do was just sit there and try and hold it shut. At that moment, my boss walked in, and I immediately screamed for him and begged to call the police. As I was stuttering my way through what was happening as I held the door shut, the man in the kitchen was screaming, beating the door, scraping the knife against it. He wasn't saying anything really of substance other than an occasional mention of his jacket. Thank Christ, the police finally showed up and apprehended this man who seemed confused as to why he was being arrested. And the wedding party was contacted the next day, and to our horror, apparently, they didn't recognize this guy. He wasn't at the wedding. When they had finally got the pictures developed and scoured through every photo, they didn't find any pictures of this man except for one photo. One picture toward the end of the night showed a group of guys and girls smoking cigars around a small bonfire outside, and in the background, you can see the guy walking up the hill toward the venue. It was blurry, but it was very clearly that guy. We still have no idea where this man came from and what his ultimate intentions were. And from what I was told by my boss, he may have been some crazy person, but that's all we know, or maybe even just some drunk who was trying to crash a wedding for some free booze. But ever since that night, I don't wear my headphones so I can hear my surroundings, and I always lock the door every time I go in and out. This story is still fresh in my head since it only happened 2 weeks ago. One of my good friends from high school got married, and I was surprised to see that I was invited to the wedding. Not because we had a falling out or anything like that, because we just haven't talked since we graduated from high school, and that was almost 12 years ago. At first, I wasn't going to go, but then I realized how many of my old friends I would see, and I got myself excited.